Please welcome Randall Kenan. Those will be for sale at the reception in the lawn.
Oh boy, how embarrassing. Well, thank you, Megan. And I want to thank Wyatt again for inviting me up here. Every time I get that call, it's like winning a prize all over again. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but and thanks to the staff. Every year I come, it's like a different metaphor. In the past, I've called you little Harry Potters, like helpers at Hogsworth. This year, like you're all like winners of the Hunger Games. you know? And to my fellow faculty, always a great joy to see you, especially to my cohort in arms, Mr. Bausch, an endless fount of jokes and stories and wisdom and decency. We have to add that. And the lovely class, I declare, we hit the jackpot this year. They're so good looking. They're all like GQ models or Vogue models, and they can write too, which is, I don't know. Last year, I came out here as a person who writes about food. I'm not going to say a food writer because who needs more labels? Actually, if you have to deal with labels like I do and are tired of it, come see me afterwards. We'll have a drink. It all started. I wrote this piece for this anthology that got discussed in the New York Times, and I was accused of being a pig pornographer, which kind of made me grin. It still does. But after that, I got invited to write pieces about food, which I did with great alacrity. Alacrity. I said alacrity. What does that mean? Don't tell anybody. I was kind of enabled by the Southern Foodways Alliance and Garden and Gun magazine, of all things, and recently, a small press that I've been involved with in our hometown of Hillsborough seduced me into editing a volume of essays about North Carolina food by North Carolina writers, which has been quite a wonderful experience. We have people like Lee Smith and our very own Jill McCorkle as contributors, and also chefs. The funny thing is, in a state in which our governor is so rapaciously anti-intellectual, we have not only the most literate chefs, but the most literary chefs in the country, and that's quite good. And I'm extremely proud of this one piece by a poet who teaches at Guilford University now, I don't know, near Greensboro, Dia Abdo, and she is Syrian. And in this lovely lyric essay, she writes about being befriended by this family of Syrian refugees. And she cooks with them. And the food they make, this traditional Syrian dish, kind of welcomes this family and connects them. And it's just, I'm so proud. It makes me proud not only to be a North Carolinian, but in the light of all these things that are going on behind us, an American. So I'm going to read two things. Read the introduction to that book that comes out in November. And I want to dedicate this reading to Tony Early, John Seropoulos, and Adam Latham. And I think the reasons will be apparent. It's called The Rooster, the Rattlesnake, and the Hydrangea Bush. So, when I was a little bitty boy, no more than 4, I carried on a feud with a rooster. This rooster had no name, nor was it a colorful bird. Dun white it was, with a set of vivid red wattles, which provoked within me a rather reptilian revulsion. I would chase the rooster, and in turn, the rooster, letting out a chanticleer squawk, would chase me in return. My childhood was not exactly idyllic, but I wouldn't trade it for Mark Zuckerberg's billions. Sustenance surrounded us, demanding industry and thrift. We might have been poor, but we were never hungry. My cousin Norman and his wife, Mrs. Alice, lived directly across the dirt road from our house. I remember every divot and rise and slope of their emerald front yard, where I'd run back and forth with this maniacal bird. I remember this great and ancient oak tree at the very edge, too big to climb, with its gnarled above the earth roots, straight out of a Grimm Brothers fairy story. I remember the barn and the pig pen to the east and the orchard to the west. It seems in those days every farmer with his own land had an orchard of some design. Cousin Norman's contained a peach tree, a number of pear trees, and a multitude of horse apple trees, the little green apples essential to making the tartest, most magical apple pies over which a boy might dream and drool. Tall and productive walnut trees, pecan trees aplenty. Cousin Norman's farm sat on a bend of a branch that snaked off to the northeast Cape Fear River. A grape arbor grew mighty close to the water. In autumn, the grape arbor produced the plumpest, sweetest, purplest scuppernongs known to man or beast. But grapes weren't the only thing that brackish branch produced. The truth is, I remember this day largely the way one remembers a Polaroid picture one took in haste. It became one of those stories told and retold so often that the tellings are mixed in with what actually happened. Unbidden, a cousin recounted this story to me at our last family reunion. I know full well he was in New Jersey at the time. Nonetheless, this much is true. Uncle Norman and Miss Alice were sitting on their high concrete porch. Miss Alice liked to dip snuff, and she would spit on occasion with great accuracy off that porch, often into the vast hydrangea bush on the edge of the porch. Front yard hydrangea bushes are not uncommon, even something of a standard in the South, but I recollect these bushes, like that oak tree, to have been of legendary proportion, not unlike those monstrous cabbages one only sees at the state fair. As soon as I walked into the yard, the rooster came flying at me, its powerful thighs pumping, its talons clawing the earth. Had I eaten one too many of its children? Not to be undone, I puffed up my chest, Tarzan-like, and rushed the feathery juggernaut, causing it to turn tail and make a mad dash for the hydrangea bush. Fairly swiftly, a mighty ruckus ensued. The great bush commenced to shimmy and shake, its green leaves to tremble earthquake-like, though at age 4, the idea of an earthquake would have been as foreign to me as a credit default swap. The rooster ejected itself from the bush rather like a white cannonball and made a beeline toward the smokehouse. The hydrangea bush continued to shake and rattle. At this stage, both Cousin Norman and Miss Alice were standing, agog. Indeed, Miss Alice was hollering. Foolishly, I moved closer to investigate. She was hollering at me to get away. Cousin Norman had gone into the house and would return soon with a shotgun. What I could see, only in flashes, was a diamondback rattlesnake coiling itself round and round the base of the hydrangea bush, causing its entirety to shake in this indecent fashion. I did not see Cousin Norman dispatch the reptile, for I had made my greatest imitation of a chicken I would ever make in my brief life. This was in rural Duplin County, North Carolina, once the epicenter of tobacco, currently the epicenter of pigs and poultry. My home, my world, was always edible, a movable feast. One of my earliest memories is the death of my great Uncle Redden when I was 3 years old. We were out grading flu-cured tobacco, and he succumbed to a blood clot on the porch of a house once used to prepare the cooked bright leaf and pack it into balls wrapped and secured by large burlap canvases. Grading, separating quality from trash, smoothing them for market one by one, was a tedious job and done largely by women. I don't remember the specific women there that day, though I do suspect I do, for I remember their faces surrounding my great Aunt Mary, whom I call Mama, the woman who raised me. What immediately followed would be something I'd witnessed for the rest of my growing up. People showing up heavy laden with food to the homes of the recently deceased. Hams, fried chicken, oven-baked barbecued chicken, pork chops smothered in gravy, dirty rice, Spanish rice, sweet potato salad galore, slaw, sweet potato casseroles, candied yams, hush puppies, cornbread, soup, chopped pork barbecue, collard greens, pound cake, chocolate cake, coconut cake, pineapple cake, red velvet cake, sweet potato pie, lemon meringue pie. My mother's lemon meringue pie was both performance art and sorcery. It enchanted anyone who ever looked upon it and who tasted it. The idea here, of course, being that the immediate family would not have to think about cooking or where to find food. Everything was taken care of. There is a lovely passage in one of the early editions of Emily Post's Etiquette. She instructs us not to ask the bereaved if they would like something to eat. Rather, we should make a warm bowl of broth and put it into the bereaved's hands with a spoon. In the end, we are talking about expressions of love, not the sentimental Hallmark card version, but material, immediate, unambiguous demonstrations that you care, that you are there. It is practical, it is flavorful, and it is real. When you grow up in a small rural community, it seems everyone is related to everyone. Somebody is somebody else's cousin. Everybody knows everybody else. It seems like a lot of people are dying because you are acutely aware of every death. You probably ate Sunday supper with that person at one point. You probably visited their sick bed, went to school with them, certainly went to church with them. It is difficult to look back on these dire gatherings without just a little mirth. Despite the somber settings, there was still a party-like atmosphere about the proceedings. Usually relatives would come from far and wide, New York, Washington, Detroit, a sense of homecoming like a family reunion. Or as Lyle Lovett once sang, I went to a funeral, and Lord, it made me happy seeing all those people that I ain't seen since the last time somebody died. Here's the Coca-Cola. Here's the lemonade. Here's the sweet iced tea. Here's the fruit punch. Here's Uncle Roma's mason jar full of bootleg moonshine, or a jug of homemade scuppernong wine. Here it is because we are all human, and as it says in the good book, man cannot live on bread alone. Certain of us sons and daughters of the South have a chip on our shoulders about stereotypes regarding the American South. Portrayals, cliches, misconceptions about what it means to be a Southerner in the 21st century in North Carolina can be worrisome at best. Friends of mine, I presume to be more secure than I, don't give a flying rooster what people in New York or Los Angeles or Paris, France think of them. And they ask me, why do you care? You have no investment in this north-south silliness. Nonetheless, some of us still smart, as if by hornet bite, at the residue of the implication that Southern means backward, ill-educated, lazy, superstitious, unhygienic, and dumb. But I suspect at bottom, my aloof friends do care, just don't care to talk about it. One thing I've learned as an adult is that not all super intelligent people are necessarily reflective about themselves and about the world. Foodways are too often lumped in with all the other overarching, folksy, old-fashioned, technophobic, churchified photocopies of Mayberry and the General Lee. Things even get more complicated when the element or icon in question holds a special place for the Southerners. Andy Griffith, grits, okra. Yes, many of us do adore fried chicken. Yes, a great many of us have strong feelings about barbecue and sweet iced tea. That does not mean everything we eat is fried, from turkey to Milky Way bars to butter, though some do. And it is true that in my mother's hometown, Rose Hill, you can find the world's largest frying pan, used every year to fry a record-breaking amount of chicken during the poultry jubilee. Or that vegetables are little import and are meant to be boiled into shameless, tasteless mush, if not fried also. Historical nuance is rare in these too frequent caricatures. A great many Southerners aid and abet these visions of the old North State and its environs, so much so that sometimes railing against stereotypes feels quixotic at best, futile even on a good day. Nonetheless, we find ourselves, like William Faulkner's character, young Quentin Compson, having to state the affirmative with a denial. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. I don't. Why food? Let me tell you about the South. Let me tell you what they do there. How do they live there? Why do they live there? The serious study of food and foodways in the academy is still a relatively young discipline. And is still having a hard time gaining the respect it deserves. Eating is something we must do in order to live. I know people who think of food as merely fuel for their body, something to stave off hunger. To them, thinking about overmuch and surely writing about food is pure decadence, the stuff of gluttony and the idle well-off. For so long, gastronomy, which is the technical name for food writing, was a province of elitist gourmands with money to burn and no concern for their health or their waistline. In conjunction with those who actively disrespect food writing and the study of foodways are those who don't think of food at all beyond chomping down on a quarter pounder, finding the cheapest Chinese buffet, or scarfing down buffalo wings and fries while watching the NCAA tournaments. Speaking of fancy French words, the guy who came up with the idea of a dedicated discipline to writing about food and who gave us the word gastronomy was a Frenchman named Jean-Alphine Brillat-Savarin. His masterwork, The Physiology of Taste, is often quoted, in particular this line, "Tell me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are." There truly is the rub. History, geography, business, culture, science, demography, labor, narrative, myth, and folklore, even music, all intersect in the world of food. Can there be a North Carolina without sweet potatoes, blueberries, and cucumbers? Do most North Carolinians even know that our state produces more sweet potatoes than any other state? This represents 50% of the United States supply, or that our youngish wine industry brings in over $1 billion. But more, that our industry grew on the backs of the muscadine, which is one of the few grapes indigenous to North America and prolific in North Carolina. These connections are neither vague nor frivolous, but central to our state's character and the character of its people, even those who sincerely believe their lives are untouched by the food they put in their mouths. Very serious stories like the crisis among black farmers losing their farms, the ecological damage caused by industrial hog farms, and food insecurity in southern urban areas, ironically, all embrace economics, the environment, race, social justice, health, and so much more. This is the story of the Tar Heel State through food. I am so proud and grateful to each of these writers. Though Charlotte and the Piedmont stuffed this omnium gatherum about North Carolina food, we feel that our toes are digging into the beach sand while our heads are peering over Mount Mitchell. We contain multitudes. There is a place in Atlanta I insist on going every time I'm in town, the DeKalb Farmers Market. Few places, especially in the American South, bring together so many cultures, so many foods, so many people from across the globe. I like going there not just for the grains from Ethiopia, the nuts from Israel, the fruits from India and Malaysia, the fish from Europe, or the vegetables from Venezuela. Food you won't be finding in the local Food Lion or Piggly Wiggly. But also to see the people, the polyglot, multi-ethnic, multicolored parade of humanity coming together over one thing, food. People from warring backgrounds, people who are sworn enemies, gather together peacefully in a foreign land. Israelis and Egyptians, the Japanese and the Korean. To me, this is a more practical United Nations, and effectively so. This represents the power of food more than to stop hunger, more than to feed gluttony, more than sales and business. Of course, I recognize that this is a naive daydream of a world-besotted professional dreamer. I know that food cannot accomplish what politics, mighty armies, crushing economies, and slick science can achieve, though I do know that all generals and senators eat, as do business moguls and geneticists. Nowadays, places like Carrboro, Durham, Raleigh, and Charlotte, and Asheville, and Wilmington are becoming more like the DeKalb Farmers Market. It is a gradual thing, incremental, and to be sure, some of my fellow North Carolinians harbor a lot of anxiety over that change. What will happen to the old ways, they mutter? They see falafels as a threat, cactus pads as enemy combatants, sea cucumbers as arch invaders. I hasten to remind them that in London and Toronto, two of the world's most multicultural cities, you can still easily get spotted dick, Welsh rabbit, and poutine. Barbecue and fried chicken are not going away anytime soon. Today, salsa already outsells tomato ketchup in every state in the Union, yet the Constitution still stands. Meanwhile, taco trucks are blossoming all over our state like cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. in April, and we're the better for it. Some folks see the American South as a bug trapped in amber. Others see the South as an integral part of the great American experiment, still aspiring to get it right, to make it better, an ongoing thing, rich with contributions, opportunities, and possibilities. I do dream and wonder about our state's culinary future. What will newcomers bring and support? What of our past will they adopt? What blends and hybrids might occur? What new crops will we begin to grow? What new uses might we discover for sweet potatoes, collard greens, and pine needles? So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Everyone's bringing this up, and I'm going to take it. And now for something, as Monty Python would say, something completely different. This is a piece that I contributed to an anthology that the Irish novelist Colin McCann put together called How to Be a Man. And it wound up briefly on the Esquire website. And if you were like me of a certain age or not, you probably say, Esquire's still around? It is, yeah. And they have a website. God bless them. It's carved out of a longer piece, but it's fiction and no food in it. There might be, but I don't think so. It's called Ox. Esmeralda Parker McIlwain's first child, born in 1899, they named Tabitha Elsa. A boy child, my great-grandfather, born in 1901, was named grudgingly Elihu Increase McIlwain. They would come to call him Ox. By the time he was 15, the young son stood over 6 feet and would grow 6 more inches by the time he reached his majority. By his 17th birthday, he weighed well over 250 pounds, precious little of it fat. So strongly was he built that there could have been no other nickname. Despite his great size, the young man had an almost sweet demeanor, quiet, injuriously shy, so withdrawn as if to be ashamed of his gigantism. Stern like his great-grandfather, mysteriously withdrawn like his grandfather, and like his father, it seemed he harbored some deep inner question upon which he puzzled, some dark central enigma for which he sought some complex and healing answer, restless yet oddly calm. Sometimes for days he seemed to lose the power of speech and would ignore his family members, sitting upon the porch or under the walnut tree. Sometimes he would walk off into the woods and not return for a day or more, never explaining, never even mentioning his absence. By and by, the family accepted his weirding ways. He wasn't hurting anyone after all, they figured. All seemed well with the towering lad until one autumnal September evening, during his 17th year. There she sat next to her mother, the legendary Clytemnestra Cross, come to visit her kinfolks. Psyche, all of 14 and a half, her thick mop of black hair, curly and shiny in the church light, her lips as delicate as a spider's web, her butterscotch cheeks. The sight ensorcelled the young man to the point that when the last sermon was ended, and the last offering collected, and the last hymn sung, and folk commenced to socialize and mill about and take their leave, when he tried to speak to her, to say howdy, his tongue clicked, and his mouth went as dry as a tobacco barn. But once robbed of her delicious presence, the usually taciturn Elihu McElwain spoke so long and so much of his vision, his cherubim, that his running mates begged him to hush up. Clytemnestra Cross and her 3 children and her husband lived in Asheville in those days and rarely came to York County, especially considering the brouhaha over their marriage. But Ox would get word from her blessed daughter, about her blessed daughter, from one of her cousins. Over a year after that first glimpsing at First Baptist, Ox McElwain took off without a word. At first, none gave it a second thought, seeing as how he could go away from time to time, but after a week it became apparent that this time was not like the others. 6 weeks later, he returned with his 16-year-old bride. Perhaps his heart was not yet completely calcified. Perhaps looking upon his gargantuan issue, the senior Elihu Increase McElwain remembered his own young love throes, recognized the thunder of desire, and he quoted the book of Luke. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and gave his blessing to this new union in the McElwain clan. Years went by, and Ox seemed to settle down upon his return. By all accounts, he grew into a level-headed, good-natured, dependable, upright man who did more than his share of work around the farm and helping out others. He sired 3 children by Psyche until one day in 1933, while picking cotton, he stood up, stock still, and faced the horizon, the sun blazing in his eyes, and he began walking. He was indifferent to the calls at his backs. "Ox, where you going? Ox, what's wrong?" And looked back not once, and walked till he vanished entirely from view. He was not seen again for 37 years. When he returned in 1970, like a bad omen, he returned as he had left, walking. He walked straight into town, walked his way to the family house, up through the yard, beyond the house, into the wood behind the house, where, after a time, he constructed a small one-room cabin by himself and alone. When anyone was fool enough to inquire as to where he had been, what he had been doing all those years, The old man would simply say, "None of your goddamn business." Sometimes his granddaughter, Esmeralda, when she was a young girl, would go visit him at his cabin. She liked that she could stay for hours and neither of them speak a word. She liked the silence. She would watch him chop wood, whittle, and sit and smoke his pipe, cook and skin and cook a rabbit. He would cook it with carrots. There is food. He would cook it with carrots he grew and onions he found and herbs he found in the woods. The rabbit was good, she said, never gamey or wild tasting. She never asked where he had gone, why he had gone, what he had done. And sometimes she said, while watching him munching on his rabbit bones, she thought she could see in his eyes a glimmer, now and again. "What?" I would ask. "What did you see in his eyes?" "The yonder out there," she said. He brought it back with him. Thank you.